afternoon. We now have three bills. One bill has been pulled off the calendar, 378. I know that there was a lot of anticipation for that bill. So that bill has been pulled by the author, and we now have three bills today. Representative Smith, I think you have someone from out of town who wanted to testify on House Bill 212. And so then we will start with that bill. Okay. All right. Yeah, just present it and stand for questions, and then anybody that wants to testify.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First of all, thank you for your time. I certainly appreciate that. And I'm here today on House Bill 212. This was an issue brought to my attention by people living in my district. We recently started a new state park called the Chattahoochee Bend State Park, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and it has been found by lots of folks, a couple of which have airboats and don't necessarily respect the people who are already on the rivers or know the rules of the river, for lack of a better way of saying it, and been difficult to stop, been difficult to enforce any kind of law. So I started researching as a way to come up with a solution for this problem. Your airboats in particular make a lot of noise just by nature of the fact that they're airboats, and the water, the sound resonates off the water, so it bothers people in their homes near the river, but also it has become a safety issue with the people who are on canoes and kayaks on the river. And so we've actually had a good pre-meeting with our ranger about some of the problems we're facing. But I had a young gentleman who's an Emory law student helping me this session and helped me research what some other states are doing. And it's very simply outlined in the bill 212. It's asking that on line 12 that noise levels to no more than 90 decibels measured at a distance of 50 feet to help make sure that they are in compliance with what is an acceptable sound level. So that's the nature of the bill I'm presenting to you. One of the issues I also hope to learn today is, are there not already other areas in the code section I might not have found that can address this problem perhaps, or give us some kind of solution. But essentially our problem is we have a new beautiful state park, and some of the users of the river in that area are not respectful of the people who are already on the waters, and we're trying to give enforcement another tool to use.
All right. Do we have any questions of the committee? Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Smith, where did we come with the 9 decibels?
90 decibels?
Yeah, did you go out on the boat and?
No, this was researched with what other states have on the books dealing with airboats. So apparently it's not a situation just peculiar to Georgia. It's a situation throughout our country with how do you control that noise level. And this is one that we found from Florida, and several other states have attempted to deal with this situation as well. So no, I am not a scientist nor an engineer, but that's where it was found.
So is this acceptable? I mean,
yes, it's you have to have equipment to measure that noise level, and so that would be something that would be required if this became law.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Hightower.
Which river are you representing?
I'm afraid I'm the river that you and I both share, which is the Chattahoochee.
Okay.
And we think there are 3 airboats that are used back and forth. We can't figure out if there are more or not. They're hard to stop, hard to catch, etc. So it's not the Wild West, but it's close to it in that particular part of the river. So the concern is safety, the concern is noise level, and then of course your wildlife and such as that. But mainly it's the noise level and boat safety, and it happens with the McIntosh Preserve on your side and then the Chattahoochee Bend on our side. And what's happening is it's just a more popular destination now with all the amenities on both sides of the river.
Any other question, Mr. Hightower? All right. Any other questions from the committee? If not, we have some people who wish to address this bill. And if you would, Chairman Smith, if you want to just sort of, because we might be calling you back up to answer some questions, We have a Tom Parker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Parker, if you would come on up.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak. My name is Tom Parker. I live in Newnan. We paddle up and down a lot of different sections of the Chattahoochee. We've observed, as already been mentioned, 3 boats. They're very loud, 90 decibels. Well, it's got the particular boats that I've seen and have pictures of. It's like an aircraft engine. And those of you that, I don't know if you've been around an airboat or not before, but they're very loud, and pretty much they appear to be unmuffled, although I couldn't swear that I could look in the picture that I have and blow it up a little bit. Especially loading the boat and unloading the boat off of the trailer, and to be able to push that boat up there, they have to open it up wide open, and it's just ear splitting. The boats can go very fast. You've probably seen some of the Boats in the Swamp People series on TV and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of bends in the river, and they can come around the bend pretty fast. So we have to get over to the side. Sometimes they see us, sometimes they don't. We have to wave our paddles when we're paddling to get their attention to make sure. But it's mostly the noise. We used to see a lot of bald eagles up and down the river, osprey, heron, a lot of ducks. We don't see them near as much as we used to now. I personally have 6 kayaks, and I have a boat, a big ski boat, but I'm pretty sure it's not that loud. Well, I know it's not that loud. But we're not against airboats. We're just concerned about the safety issue and the environmental impact issue also as well. So.
All right, questions? Ms. Frazier.
Mr. Chairman, my question is really for Representative Smith when I can.
All righty. Do we have any questions from any of the committee of Mr. Parker? Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We have Marie Powell. Are you a member of the Powell Caucus?
I could be. Would that help? I married into that family. Does that help?
Not a doubt in my mind.
Yes, I'm Marie Powell, and I live in Newnan in Coweta County. And I was one, I think, that contacted Ms. Lynn right off the bat about when we would be kayaking about these airboats and the situation that we'd run into. We've been kayaking up and down, well, we do mostly down the rivers. Now, Tom can paddle up the rivers, but I do mostly down the rivers. But it's been a real issue running into these one particular airboat. And Tom has even had a conversation with this man, and we didn't get very far with it, asking him some questions about, what he's doing and why he's out on the river. They all have ear protection. He'll have sometimes 8 or 10 people on the boat with him, and they all have on earmuffs. We're in kayaks. We don't have earmuffs. And when this thing comes, it is just frightening. I mean, you're wondering, are they going to see us? Are we going to be able to get along the bank? And then it's frightening. It really is. And my husband, we have fishing boats. I mean, we're not against anybody out on the river with the boats, but it's just a real safety issue and concern about the airboats and anything we can do about the sound, particularly the fact that we don't see the eagles anymore. We don't see the ospreys, and it's just, that's a quiet, beautiful trip going down the river. The river is so clean and so clear now before we have a rain like we've just had. If people don't realize how beautiful the Chattahoochee River is until you get out in the kayak and you're going down in the quiet and enjoying and seeing the wildlife. Spectacular. It's just beautiful. More and more people are out there. And with the new state park, particularly the fact that there are people out there that are inexperienced, and I really consider myself inexperienced. I can't go through a lot of white water. But to think that, you're out there in a kayak and you hear this locomotive coming down the river, it's frightening. It very is. So if we could do anything that would at least calm down the noise a little bit, appreciate it. Anything that y'all could do.
Ooh. Questions from the committee? I've got a couple of questions, but I'm not sure. It might be Ms. Smith, but I might ask you a couple of things. This stretch of river we're talking about?
Yes, sir.
I see some DNR guys, they might can answer the questions too, but this stretch of the river down through there, what's the average depth of the river on the Chattahoochee?
It depends on the rain, and we count by the slats in the boat ramp to decide how high the water is when we go. That's one of the ways that we gauge it. And then there's some big rocks out there that we look to see. If we can't see the rocks, we know it's going to be clear sailing. If you see the rocks, you're going to have fun rapids going down. So it varies. But there are a lot of, if you put in at the 16 bridge, boats are very limited in there because you've got the weir down at Plant Yates. And we've seen some folks that have come up through that thing, and when the water is up, they could do it, but whew, it's frightening to see them jump back up that thing.
The reason I'm asking that question, forgive me, I'm not familiar, I'm more familiar with the Savannah River than Chattahoochee, but that type of river is not a place that would be adaptable for outboards with the props into the water,
No,
would it?
my husband certainly wouldn't put his boat in over there and tear up the motor because
So
there's
anything that's power
shoals.
generated would have to be an airboat or a,
Yes, or one of the boats that we were referring to, that the jet powered, where it doesn't, take
Right.
that much water to get through. Because on any given time, when you're coming down with the kayaks, you can get stuck on rocks, depending on the level of the water. So, and we do see fishing boats in certain areas of it, but they're limited as to where they can get on there because of the shoals. Unless the water is really, really high, and then you're really taking your life in your own hands doing that, because it gets pretty precarious out there then. But it's a beautiful river. I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have got me in that river. And now the water is so clear. I mean, when you're paddling and you can see 4 and 5 foot garfish swimming upstream, and I've even seen them with a catfish in their mouth. I mean, the turtles, the things that you see are just incredible when the water is clear, and it's just a beautiful place. And more people, we meet people out there all the time, that now that we have access at the 16 Bridge and a takeout place down at either McIntosh, which they put in a wonderful boat ramp down there, and then the new state park. And we've gone all the way to Franklin. It's just a beautiful trip down through there. So,
how many mile stretch would you dare to guess we're talking about?
I can tell you about how long it takes us to go down it. Tom, do you know how far mile-wise?
It depends on where you put in. The Cass Ferry Bridge we put in near there, all the way down to Franklin is probably about 40 miles, but there's enough bridges and access points where you can run maybe an 8 to 14 mile section, take 4 or 5 hours to paddle it, and then get out, or there's even some islands you can camp on. There's several different sections.
I guess what I'm trying to get around to is what would be the need? I mean, obviously you can't put a normal boat into the water with a prop-driven boat, so you'd have to use airboats. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to think, what purpose would someone else, would they be using these airboats to fish, to...
To navigate the shoals, to hunt, fish.
Yeah. This gentleman, one of the gentlemen that we talked to that has the one that is so terribly loud, has a big rescue sign on it. He said he's running rescues, and does rescues all over the South with his boat. I told him he's drumming up his own business. But and he just seems to be just riding. There've been one particular day, he passed us 3 times on our trip down the river, just running up and down with a different, he had a bench out in front with a bunch of people on it that they were riding. He said he was training people for rescue, is what he told us. So I don't know what he was doing, but it's loud.
Training rescue, all right. Mr. Hightower?
My wife and my family, we kayak from the 16 Bridge down to McIntosh quite often. So, I mean, I know that stretch of the river that you're talking about. A lot of this, Mr. Chairman, you can only, there's no way I'd put my fishing boat in there. I mean, the only way you're going to navigate this river in a lot of places is with some type of airboat or jet drive. I mean, if you put it in there, you're going to mess your boat up pretty bad. My caution is that I know you're enjoying it, but so is that person for their use. And anytime we put in restrictions, we're making somebody unhappy. So if we do it next year, let's say he and all his groups up here saying, well, now we can't enjoy it. And now we can't use what we have it there for. We can't go and we can't hunt. We can't fish the river like we've done for our however long they have. Or we can't go out there and have good access from when something were to happen to one of our family members kayak and we can't get it to them fast enough. I don't know, I just always have cautions when we limit others. It seems like we're playing favorites a little bit to the kayakers as opposed to the person on the airboat. And I'm the person who'd be kayaking because that's what we do. I don't have an airboat, but I do hunt, and I hunt down there a good bit. And I use my kayak when I hunt. But I can see on this river in particular, there are going to be some areas where you would have to have an airboat to do anything, really, of any substance if you're going to have to, if you need to go in a quick fashion. I understand your concern about the wildlife, but I'm always a little cautious when I pick somebody's enjoyment over somebody else's when you kind of got to look at them equally.
Right.
So.
All right. Mr. Dawson.
Yes, sir. The only thing I'm reading is the only thing we're addressing is the noise, right?
Correct,
Not
yes.
the boats themselves, nor the speed.
No.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's see. Any other questions? Yes. That's what we're fixing to get down to this to see if it's as. All right. No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Like Representative Smith said earlier, we had a little pre-chat, which was very good. Yeah, you got us together, so it's already in the works a little bit. But I'm here today on behalf of the Department of Natural Resources to respectfully, very respectfully, oppose the bill, and a couple reasons why. We had a similar decibel limit in law in the late 80s, which was, for lack of better terms, unenforceable. The prosecutors didn't like it. It was very exact. It's hard to get the conditions right, and it's an exact science. So for that reason, we had a very hard time getting any traction in court. So that being said, all the training we did, the meters, they kind of went by the wayside. We took it out, and you see basically this is the law as it reads today minus the decibels. So that has worked well for us. When you pull up to a vessel, you can actually see a muffler. You can see the water injection. You can see the baffles if they have the stacks on the racing boats. So you know immediately if they're in violation with the muffling law. So again, we have concerns about this would be a statewide initiative, I'm assuming. So therefore, training would be involved. I checked briefly on that. Tennessee went through this last year. They implemented this law, did the training, bought the meters, and they invested, probably counting personnel time, upwards of $50,000 to get it stood up. And they really haven't utilized it a lot based on the sheer technicality of the process. And the conditions have to be just right to do this testing. So that being said, that's in a nutshell kind of why we have concerns.
All right, any questions from the committee? Really?
Well, you can tell I'm not the outdoorsman as far as that. I just watch the swamp people.
Gotcha. You probably know as much as anybody then.
But my question is, since this thing is only pertaining to the noise level, how come the noise level is so important?
Just for disturbance. Typically, the noise, you see this associated with novelty boats like racing boats, airboats, go-fast boats, cigarette boats, those type boats. Because anything the public buys now from the manufacturer meets strict regulations, and there's no problem. So it's something somebody's tinkering with to make faster, put a car engine on it. In this case, this airboat, Representative Smith's constituent showed me, is a very expensive airboat with an aircraft engine on it. And probably it wasn't muffled. So we can help with that. You know, we can interact with this person on the river, plus he had search and rescue labeled on it. I'm concerned about that. There's no registration. He has to be working for a state or federal agency to bypass the registration. So there's a lot of concerns, plus the speed, the reckless operation, just the general not having a lot of courtesy on the water.
Thank you.
Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I probably need to ask you the question now because it relates to the penalties. I mean, this is just a general bill, but there's no penalties if I don't muzzle or if I do not adhere to this law. What will happen? I mean, are you going to cite me, or are you going to fine me, or am I going to be jailed, or what?
Typically what happens, again, it's usually a novelty boat. We see the boat. Everybody's pointing to the boat, so we go pull it over. If they are in violation, we tell them the law and say, look, you need to take it off. It's got to be muffled or have these baffles or water injection. And typically they take it off and go have it fixed, or they don't bring it back to that location. But if you do come back, we could fine you. It's a misdemeanor fine, so up to $1,000 or up to a year in jail.
So where is that? Is that standard?
Yes, ma'am. That's standard for Title 52 unless otherwise specified.
So is this law really needed, or should we just have called you about the 3 guys that's running up and down the river?
And they have. That's the way we would prefer to handle it. Absolutely. And we're already working toward that. We've got some good photos, some good evidence. So we got enough to talk to this gentleman as a courtesy call anyway. Plus, we're going to have a presence there, I can assure you.
Mr. Hightower.
One of my concerns as well is that this would be applied throughout the entire state. My family on my mom's side is from South Louisiana, where airboats are much more, I mean, they're everywhere, because down there in the swamp you have the water levels coming up and down so much that you have to have airboats a lot of times.
Right.
They're a lot louder because of their type of engine. I mean, when you get beside a single prop airplane, it's really the exact same sound. They could have this boat muffled and everything done correctly. It's just you got to make a lot of wind to get this thing moving, and moving that much wind creates a lot of noise. But there are going to be other waterways in the state of Georgia that if we do this, man, we're going to be restricting a whole lot of people from doing what they need to do to enjoy where they've grown up their whole life. There's a lot of, I think this would impact more than just the strip of the river we're talking about here. I mean, we got to remember we have a very large swamp down in South Georgia that people are going to need to use these airboats like this. And if we put this type of restriction on, we may find ourselves back here very quickly undoing the mess we just made.
I think you made some valid points. How experienced the operator is has a lot to do with the wind noise, the prop noise, how they feather the boat, get it going. You know, if you just want to hoss it and floorboard it, and you're going to make a lot of noise. And
that's why you see a lot of these airboat drivers. I mean, they wear earmuffs.
They do
when they ride, because I mean these things are loud.
You know, we have a departmental airboat, and they do have like the aviation earmuffs that you can talk.
My other fear is that I started off in the prosecution office as a solicitor in Carroll County working there, and then I still prosecute misdemeanors now for 2 municipalities. And the fear that I would have is getting you guys in and me being able to actually prove this decibel level.
Exactly.
And whether I can certify you guys as an expert, whatever instrument you're using, or whether I got to get in somebody else that can come in and testify that it's. When you do things that are this technical, it can be tough, and you got to have a lot of certifications in line. I mean, we'd have to put in procedures as to what these instruments, how they can be used. I would make it analogous to DUI law. Whenever you blow in the breath machine or anything like that, I mean, it has to be one that's approved. The officer has to be licensed. I mean, on how to use the machine. I just don't know how cost effective it'd be to do this if there's other ways of getting around it, as in calling you guys and saying, hey, there's a guy out here
Right.
harassing us.
And we do get loud boat complaints, airboat complaints. Typically, it's 90% of the airboats are in, like you said, remote areas. They're either alligator hunting, they're bow fishing, they're just out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and no one says a word. But they'll go to Clarks Hill Lake or Lake Hartwell, and they'll bow fish right up next to somebody's dock and crank it up at 2 in the morning, and they're going to call. So we have to ask them nicely to respect others. So we will get calls of that nature.
Do we have any other questions? Well, thank you. I do want to ask you a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
About enforcement. You know, a lot of us who've had an active relationship with DNR and our rangers for a long time, a lot of times we have problems with enforcement because you have more trouble spots. Some that are hotbed for trouble spots, and then you got a lot of peaceful lakes like Lake Hartwell.
Right.
You know, and you know we generally don't have trouble with these folks. We do have these boats on Lake Hartwell, but if they pull up to some of our docks at 2 in the morning and wake us up, we shoot at them.
Might find some lead. Yeah. Take care of it yourself.
But just a question: how many rangers do we actually have? How many actual rangers do we have today?
Today, I think a safe number is 200.
And that is down.
That's
from,
counting everybody from admin on down.
And that's actual DNR rangers.
Yes.
And that's down from
all-time high of 252. Plus, you know, we got about 50 to 60 counties with not a ranger living in them. Right.
Exactly right. Just a little footnote for the committee members: if you ever have an opportunity to deal with the budget and their salaries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any other questions? Arthur? You know, I've got concerns, and you and I've been talking since back last summer, last fall, I can't remember when, and we were talking about this issue. And you know, I've been around here long enough. I remember when we tried this grand experiment on the decimal reduction back years ago, and it didn't work then, quite frankly. I'm thinking that maybe this conversation with DNR is that they can designate certain stretches of that river as a, quote, zone that they would be looking at for noise pollution and unacceptable behavior as far as these boats and the such. Do we think that this might go somewhere, Colonel?
That has potential, yes, sir. The state park area, I'm assuming.
Not that I don't have sympathy for my fellow member of the Powell Caucus that lives on the Chattahoochee, but the members of the Powell Caucus that lives on Lake Hartwell, we do have some concerns because we have a lot of loud boats that streak across the lake. So at the prerogative of the chair, I'm going to hold this bill in the bosom of the committee, and then if you could, would you let us know how your relationship with DNR is coming about maybe remediating these problems down on the river?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would that be acceptable?
Yes, and I want to thank the committee for their time and indulgence. In the beginning, when I first found out about this problem, you know, you start doing your research, seeing what other states have done and how to solve problems, and the first instinct was how to get rid of the boats, but then it settled down and you realize maybe there's a way to regulate it. But in this process, also learning about the other uses and rights of people on the water. But in the end, I think what's happened in my particular area of the state is we now have this absolutely phenomenal area of the state along the Chattahoochee River, and more people are discovering that. And like sometimes it's hard to teach morals, maybe it's hard to teach courtesy, but I think that if we can follow along that way, and it appears that the DNR rangers are going to be more active in our area. We're still relatively new, and we're being discovered all the time, so we probably have a much higher profile than we ever thought we would have. But I do want to point this out. Several years ago, when I first got elected for office, and I ran on the issue of the Chattahoochee River, and people would say, well, why is that such a bother? And it limited everything my county could do and Carroll County could do, any of the lands that were along that area, because I would say on a bad day in Atlanta, You didn't have to go to our river to see it. You could smell it. And I'm talking several miles inland. And so I never thought in my lifetime that my problem would be trying to regulate noise on the Chattahoochee. I was afraid to get into the Chattahoochee. So one solution has brought a small problem, but I think we found a way to solve that. And by the way, those of you in Atlanta and those of us who are paying that tax to clean up that sewer problem, come see a beautiful lake and river.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for coming. House Bill 378 has been pulled. House Bill 366. Representative Hitchens.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I come before you today for House Bill 366. This is agency legislation that pertains to Peace Officers Standards and Training Council. And I assure you it won't be near as lengthy as the previous bill. This is cleanup legislation, and essentially it affects 3 areas: discipline, testing, and training. And the first part of the bill deals with an issue that when the bill was written about 2 years ago, it was essentially written for, and that has to deal with the ability of the executive director of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Council to suspend the certification. At that time, as a peace officer who was indicted for a felony. As many of you know, the Post Council disciplines and has purview over more than just peace officers. It has purview over communications officers and has purview over jail officers. What this legislation does, on page 3, line 83, it says, upon the arrest or indictment of, and it used to say peace officer, now it says an officer, which includes the other two classes. It's worked exceptionally well for peace officers indicted, and now they would like the ability to suspend the certification of communications officers and jailers who've been indicted for a felony. The reason for that is Post Council has always had the ability to do that, but they meet quarterly. They meet for 1 day every 3 months, and when somebody gets indicted for a felony, they can't bring the people together to effect the removal of the officer on a temporary basis. So they've given that authority to the executive director, and it's worked very fine so far with peace officers, and they'd like to extend it to communications officers and jailers. The second part of it goes to line 121 on page 4, and it has to do with another simple change, and that is that there's a requirement before you can become a certified peace officer, before you can go to the academy, that you have to pass an aptitude test. And in the past, if you were unsuccessful in your attempt to pass that examination, you had to wait 6 months before you could take it again. The cost used to be borne by the state, and that's been changed, and the applicant bears the cost of the examination now, so they want to remove that line and allow them to take it as often as they determine that they want to pay for it. And the last part has to do with training, and there are a couple issues here. The first is that there's a requirement that each peace officer state is required to do 20 hours of in-service training each year. There's been some questions in the past about the first year when they go to the academy. They have to go to school for about 10 weeks, and whether or not they should have to do their in-service training for that first year. This will exempt them, having spent over 400 hours in the classroom, from having to do the extra 20 hours. It also changes the last year of your employment. If you retire from law enforcement, you don't have to do the 20 hours in your last year. And the last part of it is a new provision. In the past, if somebody was unsuccessful in completing their 20 hours of in-service training each year, they could apply for a waiver, or they could come. If they didn't, they would be brought before the training committee of the council, and they would have to give an explanation, and they could discipline them for that. What they require now is that it's the responsibility of the individual officer. If he doesn't do that, he will lose his certification, and until he takes action to do the coursework and to get it reinstated. And that's essentially all I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I just want to ask a question. I'm looking through here, and I noticed about the only substantive change in the first 110 lines was basically changing from peace officer to officer.
That's the catch.
But I did notice it started on section 2 and 3. You go back to using the word peace officer in there again.
And I went back and checked with legislative counsel about that, and she said that in the introductory part that that didn't appertain. So.
I've noticed in the first 110 lines, the biggest change was they struck the word peace in there probably about 50 times for the peace officer and just made it officer. But I noticed in section 2 and 3, it's still leaving the word peace officer in there.
This particular code section is the only code section that they have discipline officers, discipline, suspend or certifications, or reprimand them, whatever they need to do, and it needs to apply to all three. As far as the other type code sections, the training and the requirements are set out separately for each function. The
Right.
police officers
That's
are
correct.
here, the jailers are here, and the communications officers are here. So there's no need to change it throughout the entire.
So they need to leave the peace officer, bring them
And I
all
was-
in the last.
And I was in there, I didn't realize you were speaking to the body. I went back and checked in the introductory part, it still says peace officer.
All right, do we have any questions of any of the committee members of Representative Hitchens? Mr. Topham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just one question. At the end of Section 3, lines 157 to 167, it requires them to act in a timely manner. Do you think that's adequate enough, or do you think it should have a time period, like 7 days, 30 days, instead of leaving it somewhat vague?
Well, every time they go to post-certified class, they fill out a form called the C-12, which is computerized, and it should be taken care of within a matter of days. What happens is, at the end of the year, when somebody hasn't complied with their 20 hours, it comes up on the computer. And in the past, they've been very forgiving and tried to give people a chance, but now we've dealt with a couple of issues, and I see some of the people from the GBI have just walked in with some shooting incidents, and people who have let their certification lapse. And you can imagine if they haven't taken their firearms proficiency and they've been involved in a deadly force incident, what repercussions are involved. But I think they have a grasp on it now, and it'll be much more effective in the future.
So you're comfortable with it as is within a timely manner?
Right.
Okay.
Isn't it an annual basis that expires automatically on a particular date, or I'm not sure about that?
It's calendar year.
It's a calendar year, that's what I thought. They know that, and the officers know that it's a calendar year.
Right.
And I might add, along those lines, what's happening is the certification's lapse, nobody's being notified because there's not a suspension taking place, and these people are making arrests. And then they're getting on the stand, and they don't have the requirement, but once there's emergency suspension jumped in, the prosecutor and the local folks are notified. So that triggers all of this happening to try to prevent these cases from being lost with officers that don't have the required.
And I'm personally aware of a couple of shooting incidents, and the GBI goes in, does the investigation, and they found out that the person hadn't taken their use of deadly force and their firearms proficiency, and that certainly brings everything to a different level.
That's almost like a real estate broker that lets his license lapse, isn't it?
Well, it's unforgiving at that point.
All right. Mr. Topham, you finished?
Good, thank you.
Any other questions by the committee?
I appreciate it, and
We have no other questions. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak on this? Mr. Rotunda.
I just need to support the representative's need for this bill. I've been a member of Post Council since 1996, and the training issue particularly and the discipline have been a real habitual problem. To follow up on what the attorney said, this year was the first time they kicked in a new database concept, and effective January 1st, the people who didn't comply with the training requirements of the 20 hours, including the specialized training for such as police chiefs, they received notifications. Apparently, Post generated almost 10,000 notifications this year, and indicating that they lost their arrest authority. In February 1st, that suspension became a revocation. So it is a very serious matter, and I also have to tell you that being part of Post Council for that period of time, I've seen those shooting incidences come back and bite the respective counties and cities because they didn't get the proficiency aspect of the shooting as well as the use of deadly physical force that was necessary, where civil litigation could very well prevail.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Frank.
Frank.
Any questions of Mr. Rotunda? If not, what's the will of the committee?
Motion.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Now, are there any other comments? Anyone wishes to be heard? If not, you know, this is strange. We got a bill that's actually coming out of here with, that's not a substitute. Are we sure there's not some correction this committee could scrutinize on this? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And ayes have it. All right, we have House Bill 218, Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I have HB 218, which has to do with the 10-year batteries on new units or new dwellings. And this piece of legislation is needed because smoke detectors with the integrated batteries that last 10 years, it will lessen the possibility of having non-functional smoke detectors because the batteries ran out, or for those directly wired or not operating in case of loss of power. And I submit this and ask for the committee's favorable consideration.
Question. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Jones, is it not true that this bill is simply to protect our children and our youth?
Our children, youth, and families, that is correct.
I appreciate this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jones, just one question. What's the cost of these batteries that will last longer?
I don't have a cost associated with this, but for those that are building the new units, we are requesting, or the bill is requesting, instead of just the 1-year batteries, to put the 10-year batteries in.
Thank you.
Representative Atwood.
I think, Representative Jones, thank you. I think you may have answered. I was just wondering if you happen to know what the length of time that the batteries last now for these, because I'm not, I mean, I install them myself in my home, but I really have no idea.
Well, usually we encourage people to change them once a year when the daylight savings time changes. And so I would say maybe a year, year and a half. I don't know how long they actually will last, because we usually just encourage our constituents or people to change them with daylight savings time.
So we're forcing everyone to purchase these, even those that change?
With the new dwellings.
Just new dwellings?
Right.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Hightower.
So if I were to build a home in 2015, if this were to go through, then you're requiring me to put in this specific type of battery?
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is to protect me from my stupid decision of putting a different battery?
Well, it's a safety measure for those in the families to help prevent most of these fires that we're having, smoke detectors that are no longer working. I understand that the 10-year batteries are more effective, and that some states or some areas have gone to the 10-year batteries.
Yes, ma'am. And I don't mean that, please don't take that as me playing down this. I did not mean for it to come across that way. I meant for it to come across as sometimes I'm very cautious when we mandate others to do things, when it should be up to them to make those type decisions. I totally understand that you want to protect others, especially in this situation, children who live in a home that have no say in what type battery is there, and I see the good there. I'm just always cautious when we start mandating that others have to do certain things to to keep them safe, especially full adults. You know, I understand on the children aspect, like seat belts for minors and anything protecting minors that usually aren't able to make the decisions themselves. But when we start mandating adults to do things, I always just get a little cautious. So if it came across rude, I apologize. That was not my intent.
Okay.
Let's see. Representative. Is that you, Scott? Is that you? Oh, Ms. Frazier. I'm sorry, Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jones, the need for this bill was brought on by exactly what measure? I understand the safety measure of this, and I applaud you for the safety measure of this by installing this tenure, but was there cases or incident that brought on this, the need for this bill for the batteries, for the 10-year batteries?
No, it's strictly just a safety measure, something that I see that is needed here in Georgia.
And where do we purchase these 10-year batteries?
The builders of the new dwellings and the new dwelling units will do the purchasing of these 10-year batteries. I understand that I was told that that's something that they plan to go to, and that's something that they had been talking about and will be looking into. So this legislation is just not addressing if I'm a homeowner, addressing that you go out and buy the 10-year batteries. This is just for the new dwellings, January 2014.
Thank you.
Finish, Ms. Frazier.
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the cost of the batteries. Not that it's a big expense. Right now you pay $2. I want to make sure, is this going to cost $50? And if you have to have 2 detectors in a home, and I understand because it is a new dwelling, contractors will be having to include that in the overall price of the dwelling that they're building. Have you consulted with anybody to find out what these costs would be and how it would affect building? Again, it's a small amount of money in the overall, but at the time when our real estate market is hurting, I don't want to hurt anything with even an extra nickel that you don't have to. But basically, it's a good idea. We need to have better batteries. But again, how big of a difference is the cost of the batteries?
As I stated earlier, I don't have a cost associated with this, but I did have a conversation with someone in the apartment association telling me that this is something that they're looking to go to, the 10-year batteries. I did not discuss the cost, and I have not looked into the cost, but this is something that I understand from my conversation that they are planning to go to this, and so I don't know what the cost is.
Thank you.
Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate what you're trying to do, and I understand the cost issue, and I would think that potentially with respect to landlords of apartments, part of that might just be the economics, because the labor cost of having to go around and replace the batteries on an annual basis may be greater than the 10-year batteries themselves. Do you know, and I apologize for not knowing the answer to this, my smoke detectors in my house, they beep and very loudly in a very annoying manner, and so it forces you to do what you need to do, which is to change the batteries. Do you know, is that standard kind of across the board so people know if their batteries are low so they can be replaced?
From what I understand with the 10-year batteries, that there is a notification type, and that there will not be that notification. Sometimes the batteries will beep when even if it's not needing a battery. But no, I don't know what that answer is to that one.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lunson.
Yes. New construction, does this bill just applying to new construction?
Yes, it is.
Okay. In new construction, does not code call for them to be hardwired?
Does the new construction,
call for the detectors to be hardwired?
I don't know what the installation process would be.
So the batteries that you are referring to, would this just be for backup purposes if we're talking about a hardwired situation?
It's not the backup purpose. It's just, it will be the 10-year battery.
Okay. So, okay. I'm just confused because, as I said, I thought because of new installation required it to be hardwired or direct wired.
And let's see, in this legislation, it says to provide that any battery-operated smoke detector shall meet certain specifications, and that they will have the 10-year batteries that operate, that will be put in them.
Because hardwired units do have a backup battery. That's what I was trying to clarify here.
Okay, I don't know the answer to that.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions of the committee? I'm about to wear this dog out. Do we have anyone here that wishes to testify? Do we have anybody here from the Firefighters Association or any of the public safety? I saw a finger.
Yeah.
All right.
Brian Fiveash here on behalf of United Technologies Corporation and also the Apartment Association. We don't have objections, but you're correct. Most, I think since 1994, everything's hardwired. Just to answer a couple of questions, the cost is approximately like $19.95 as compared, you can get the battery operated for about $2 or $3. These are more expensive, but we don't have objections. And I met with Representative Jones. We're working with the Fire Marshal's office as they're updating their codes on a similar, through the regulatory process on this issue, through KITA, who manufactures the product. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Fiveash? Thank you. I saw another finger. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Suzanne Williams, and I represent the Home Builders Association of Georgia. And first of all, let me apologize to Representative Jones that I have not spoken with her about this legislation, and I apologize for that. We do have several concerns. The representative was right about all new, excuse me, all new dwellings, single-family residences are built with hardwired with a battery backup. That's been, I think, as Mr. Fiveash said, since '94. That being said, no new homes are being built with battery-operated smoke detectors. The expense, again, I was just learned about the expense. As you well know, if the builder pays for it, ultimately it's the consumer's going to end up paying for it because the builder's not going to pay for it. The other thing is we've been, over the years, over the many years I've been down here, we have dealt with building code issues through the legislature, and building codes are written and enforced by the Department of Community Affairs and local building departments across the state. And we would prefer for all the codes issues to go through the Department of Community Affairs, be aired out. They meet, there's a state codes advisory committee that meets during the year and usually comes back in January with recommendations. So that was another thing that we would request, that the building code issues go through the building code process. With that being said, and I certainly, and we do respect Representative Jones and her wanting to keep people safe. So with that, I'll take any questions or be happy to try.
Good information. Do we have any questions? Any questions? No?
Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Frank?
Yes, sir. You just asked about public safety. I recently replaced all the batteries in my home. it could be labor intensive. But the reason why I mention that is that my fear is if there is a false alarm in a battery, it triggers the mechanism to maybe send the alarm to a fire department. In that particular case, and it's happened to me several times where a fire department was inadvertently alerted, even if you call the fire department, they are prohibited from stopping their movement to your home. They have to respond. So basically what I'm saying is if there is a false alarm based upon a bad battery, the fire department cannot stop their response to the home. They're forbidden to do that under many codes. So I'd hate to think about the possibility of a bad alarm resulting in a fire official being injured responding to a home that it wasn't necessary to even respond to. Just food for thought. I haven't given the author any insight or haven't discussed it with the author, and I'm not a fire expert, but I know from replacing those batteries that I would like to replace it personally every 10 years, but because they're a pain in the neck. I'm getting older and getting on the ladder is a little bit more difficult. But that's my personal opinion. It's not the association stand, but I am concerned about firefighters responding inadvertently to bad false alarms.
Do we think that we've ever had a fire department that's ever been contacted because of a chirping battery?
No, it's not the chirping. It's if it gives a false indicator, a signal of a false alarm. And I don't know if alarms do that habitually or not. I do know that in one particular case, in my case, it did give the false alarm. The company wouldn't stop the response, neither would the fire department.
Cool. Any
Sorry,
questions?
sir, I wish I could,
Any
enlighten
questions
more.
of the speaker? If not, do we have anyone else who wishes to be heard on this issue? Ms. Jones, I'm going to make a recommendation. We've heard several things about DCH, Community Affairs, and all that set some of these requirements. In light of the fact we don't have anyone from any of the firefighters' organizations and such, I do know a little bit about these 10-year batteries, and I think that what one of the speakers had spoke of, you can buy these fire alarms and these smoke detectors for as low as $5, $6 a piece. You can buy them for 19 or 20 bucks a piece for the 10 years. And I will tell you, they're going to outlive it, because if you ain't got to stand up on a chair with one leg to try to change one of the things because it's about drove you crazy in the middle of the night, it is worth that. But that being said, I think there's a little bit more here that needs to be looked at. And I'm going to send this to a committee of Mr. Hightower, Mr. Holcomb, Ms. Frazier, and Ms. Taylor. I'm going to let you work with them, see if we can bring some other folks in here that can tell us the proper way of doing something on this. That'd be all right?
All right, as she so states.
If you can meet with them. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank y'all for being here. I want to thank all our folks out there in uniform for all you do. Be careful.